2021 be approved, say aye.
It's the final plenary session for the year in the Senate, and the upper chamber is in a hurry to pass the 2022 Appropriation Bill, in line with its promise to continue with the practice of a one-year budget cycle in the country.
2091.
It retains majority of the estimates presented by President Buhari in the budget, but increases the benchmark price of crude from $57 to $62 per barrel.
The increase in oil benchmark from $57 per barrel to $62 per barrel to reflect the current market value in the international markets. Debt service, 3.9 trillion.
The upper chamber increases the budget deficit by 98 billion naira to include requests made by the executive for some projects not provided for in the budget and could not be covered by the increase in revenue.
The committee recommends that the additional revenues discovered should be provided to the following agencies that forwarded their requests for more funding for very critical projects: Works and Housing, Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, for the 2023 general elections, Defense, and the National Population Commission, NPC, for the 2022 population census.
For the 2022 appropriation bill, we are expecting that the bill will be cleaned up between today and tomorrow, and we hope that by tomorrow the bill will be sent to Mr. President for his assent.
The Senate also approves President Buhari's request for the development of 276.7 billion naira to fund expenditures in the 2021 budget. The development request is for the payment of contractors, public service wage adjustment for MDAs, funds for the Ministry of Education, Nigeria Air Force, Defense and FEMA. The Senate then adjourns to the 18th of January 2022. Linda Akibi, Channels Television News.
It's 2 days to Christmas, and I wonder what the family budgets of many are like, but maybe that's a little oversimplifying Nigeria's budget for 2022. More details on that you'll find in this next conversation. Malcolm, good morning.
Good morning, Ayo. Really wanted to join you in the papers, but you are having so much fun. Anyways, we are now moving on with a rather interesting topic, and we hope to keep it as simple as possible so that our viewers will be able to follow the conversation. We're joined this morning to shed a little more light on the budget by Mr. Eze Onyekbere, who's the lead director, Center for Social Justice. He's an economic policy analyst and also a lawyer. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
My pleasure.
We also have joining us virtually this beautiful morning, Mr. Imawosu, I say Dr. Imawosu, who is the head of Department of Economics, University of Nigeria, Nsukka. He is also a visiting scholar at IMF Washington, D.C., technical assistant office of finance minister between 2013 and 2014. He joins us via Zoom from Enugu. Dr. Imawosu, welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Good morning.
Well, initially, according to what you've seen in the papers, after huffing and puffing, the senators eventually deferred their response to the president's non-assent of the electoral bill to next year. There had been talks that they were not going to touch the appropriation bill again until they had, firmed up a response to the president on his non-assent to the electoral bill. So perhaps it came as a surprise. I don't know if you were surprised, but it came as a surprise of some sorts that eventually what the Senate did yesterday was to pass the appropriation bill. I don't know. I just said it came as a surprise. At least it came as a surprise to me. Did it come as a surprise to you?
No, it did not come as a surprise to me because we have to separate matters of state. The budget had been presented over 2 months ago, and more or less we've devised a new budget calendar, which ensures that we get the budget passed before the Christmas and New Year break of the legislature, and forwarded for the president's assent so that the budget implementation starts exactly on the 1st of January. And so they've been on to achieve that timeline. So what happened in the last 2-3 days with the president's refusal to give assent to the electoral bill, to make it the electoral act, should not come in between passage of the budget. It will be like some grown-ups who are sulking and say, okay, because you didn't put some more than 2 pieces of meat inside my soup, therefore I will refuse to do A, B, C, or D. They can always come back to override the president's veto if need be. So I expected that they should go ahead and pass the budget and then find a way, constitutional way of dealing with the president's refusal. If they feel angry enough, they override the veto. If they think that it is something that they can go and take a second look at, as well, they can do that.
So you think that they've shown maturity in terms of how they've handled it?
They've shown maturity compared to the president's attitude to all this, who did not show, with utmost respect to him, did not show sufficient maturity because this document had been with him for so long. He didn't need to wait until the last day. I mean, traveling to Turkey, of what moment is that to Nigeria or to us? I mean, the whole of Africa has become so trivialized, and we have degenerated so much that one country, Turkey, holds Turkey Africa, has all African leaders together in Turkey. India does the same, China does the same, and you go and read an address and think you're achieving something, instead of sitting down in your country and putting democracy on a firmer hold. So as far as I'm concerned, that was a wasted trip. He did not need to wait until the last moment. Also, if you look at the trajectory of Mr. President in terms of granting assent to the electoral bill from the 2018-2019 era, you recall that prior to the 2019 elections, there were about 3 or 4 amendments of the electoral bill. Each time they amended the bill and sent to him, he brought up one excuse. They would go back, do exactly what he said, bring it back, he finds another excuse. He kept dribbling until the last minute, say, oh, it's too close to the elections, maybe we are going to have a situation where it will unduly alter the calculations and things INEC is doing, therefore he refused. So clearly, he is not a pro-electoral act reform candidate. He's stuck to the old way of doing things. Even when he has no more stake as a person, he still thinks the old way of doing things should continue. So I wouldn't be surprised, even if they come back, decide not to override his veto, go and do exactly what he has said. I'll bet ₦1 million that Mr. President, I know, will not likely sign. He has all kinds of hawks around him who will always find faults to retain the status quo. I mean, what are we talking about? Democracy?
Okay, well, what we're talking about now is 2022
let's get back to the budget. Let's get back to the budget.
Let's get back to the budget. We saw the assumptions. We saw now that, I mean, well, we've seen that that they have finally passed the budget, and it's gone up from the initial 16.391 billion naira, which the president presented. It's now, what was passed was about 700 billion naira higher at 17.13 trillion naira. Now, we've seen a few of the parameters also go up as well. The benchmark price, which has always been a bone of contention between the executive and the National Assembly, but somehow it looks like they've been able to manage, you know, expectations between the two arms right now. So we've seen the benchmark price also become quite optimistic as well, going up from $57 to $62 per barrel. Is that overly optimistic in your view?
Well, let me start by saying that it's become the tradition of the legislature in Nigeria to always increase the budget. They never decrease. They always increase the expenditure profile they were given by this time about 735 billion naira. And then partly to make some money to fund it, that's why they must have increased the benchmark from 57 to 62, which is an additional $5 per barrel times about 1.88 million barrels a day. If you look at the current price of crude oil, which is doing about, I think, about $75.4 per barrel, nobody's sure that it's going to continue to be that high. At some point it went up to 80 or 81. So it could have been better to be a little bit reserved, not to be overtly optimistic in increasing it to 62, because nothing says that it cannot crash below that $62 per barrel. All that is needed is to have a regime, as we have under the Fiscal Responsibility Act, to say that once the price of crude oil crosses the benchmark price, you save it in the excess crude account, and then at some point in the future, you share the money to all the tiers of government, all who are supposed to have benefited from that excess in the first place.
So the argument, sorry to interrupt you, the argument of the National Assembly has always been that when that happens, when the monies are going to the excess crude account, accrued to it, that oftentimes they don't come back to the National Assembly for appropriation of those funds. They are spent without appropriation, and they'd like to reduce the margin of that.
No, I think it will also be a failure on the part of the National Assembly to allow expenditure without appropriation, because the Constitution is clear. Section 80 and 81 literally says no expenditure without appropriation, and every expenditure without appropriation is an impeachable offense authored by whoever authorizes it, whether it's a president or governor or minister. So what I expect is that if the accounts is properly kept, and the National Assembly can always call for what has accrued over and above what they approved. If you spend a kobo, they should summon the person and administer the appropriate sanction. If they have been sanctioning whoever has spent that money over and above what they approved, then the executive wouldn't be doing that. So it's possible they've been doing that, but because the National Assembly allows them. If it is Mr. President, if he gives such an order, he should be called to explain. If the explanation is not satisfactory, well, maybe because his party is in power, they could give him a final warning and say, if you do it again, we impeach you. And he will have to sit up. So I think that we should also remember that if we don't have any little buffer, there's no buffer in that account today, quite unlike when the Obasanjo days when we had so much money there. So if anything should happen tomorrow, where do you fall back on? You start running, you start devaluing your currency. So even though there are two sides of the coin, yes, the executive will seek to mismanage the money, you should also think of getting a buffer for the Nigerian family in case there is a fiscal crisis, in terms of you don't have anything. At least you have something to fall back on for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, and then things may change again for the better.
Let's go to Dr. Wonswa and take his views as well. Dr. Wonswa, do you think that the increment in the price of crude is overly optimistic?
Well, what we have known over the years is that sometimes when you see higher prices of crude, it shows such a price increase, or maybe it's not sustained for a very long period, because it shows the seed of its own destruction. So anytime the global economy is facing energy crisis, such crisis would end up crashing crude oil prices. So I think raising the benchmark to $2 per barrel is too optimistic, as my colleague has said. I think being conservative at $57 per barrel, which of course was almost the average for 2021, is more realistic. Because I don't know, at the beginning of 2021, we may see a turn in expectations around the world, and this might affect the price of crude downwards. I don't think going up to $52 per barrel is sustainable throughout 2022.
Well, taking a look at the general overview and the parameters which the Senate is relying upon to pass this budget. For instance, the GDP figures are expected to grow by 4.3%. Looking at inflation, around 13%, is still expected to be double digits even in 2022. The exchange rate is still conservatively kept at 410 naira to the dollar. These are some of the parameters which the Senate have kept in the budget. What are your thoughts on, one, our expected growth rate for 2022? Do you think that we can meet even though it's still low, but can't remember the number after the decimal now, maybe 4.2 or thereabout, even 4%, do you think that is also overly optimistic?
Yeah, it is, because it's hard for economies to achieve 4% growth rate, especially in a critical period where economies are facing so many constraints. We have COVID-19 putting a serious constraint on supply chain. We have so many constraints, bottlenecks here and there, infrastructural bottlenecks, and so many other factors. So, putting growth rate of 4.2% is highly ambitious. So, if you ask me, I would even suggest something in the neighborhood of 2% to 2.1%. This is more realistic because if an economy grows at 4%, if you look at average growth worldwide, you cannot get 4% on average, even if you include OECD countries. So I don't think that is realistic. I don't think that is realistic. Now, looking at the inflation rate of 13%, if you look at high cost of energy and other supply side bottlenecks, and these things are likely to increase in 2022. Remember that government is planning the removal of subsidy completely at the beginning of 2022. So one should not expect a low inflation. I don't think where that is coming from. So exchange rate is another thing. That has been a problem in the economy. We don't have a uniform exchange rate. So the 410 point something the dollar, I don't know whether that is official. I don't know which exchange rate that is. So we have multiple exchange rates in Nigeria. So that assumption again is hard to understand by analysts. So these are my takes because I don't think 4.2% growth rate is realizable. Of course, if an economy grows at the rate of 4.2%, that economy is doing well. You cannot find up to 20 countries growing at that rate if you remove China and India. You can't find, even advanced economies, you can't find 4.2%.
But some people say that Africa, or like I say Nigeria, has the potential to do just that because we are a developing economy and there's room for plenty of growth.
Yes, this has been the assumption, the economists believe that that potential is there. But, because of the number of factors in Africa, insecurity or security challenges, political instability and so many factors, this will not always be the case because this kind of potentials are just textbook potentials in which there are no constraints. So in that case, it is expected that capital will move from advanced economies to developing countries where returns to investment is expected to be higher. But that is not the only factor. The investors also look at risk. So there are high risks of investing in countries where insecurity is high and there are other so many constraints to that. So Africa may have that potential actually because of young population with the fact that productivity level may be high in such countries. But again, there are health challenges posed by COVID-19. Productivity is not likely to be as high as predicted by analysts and all those who put up the forecast of the potential. So Africa has been predicted to have this potential for over 3 decades now, and not much has been realized. So we should not continue to live on that assumption.
Well, Mr. Ekpere, you do know that there was a time when we were growing at about 6%. And I know that that time the worry of economists was that it was growth without jobs. Unemployment was high. It's even higher right now. But then it was based on the high price of crude. Now we see that crude is still our mainstay, but it's not as lucrative as it used to be a few years ago. And it has forced the federal government to look in other directions. The diversification, which we've been hearing for a long time, started to gain some ground. But we're not sure how much of that is still contributing or is currently contributing to our budget. When you look at our growth rate, the projected growth rate for 2022, you see 4%. What are your thoughts with regards to how we've done so far, especially in the last 6 years of this administration, and what we're expected to do in 2022?
I don't want to believe that a projection of 4.2% growth should be rocket science in Nigeria, considering that we've done much more than that in the previous years before the current administration. So it is a matter of the political will. If the administration can muster the political will, we can surpass the 4.2% growth. Why do I say that? Most of the constraining factors, I mean, the major one everybody's talking about is insecurity. And terming insecurity is a matter of political will, so that at least basically farmers can go back to work, people can begin to pursue their honest activities without being afraid. Investors can begin to think of coming back to Nigeria. Capital inflow will increase. You know, even Nigerians in the diaspora will begin to think more of coming home and investing. Just look at the Christmas. You know what happens in so many villages in various parts of Nigeria. The local economy simply gets a very big boost when you have 10, 15, 30, 100 young men and women coming in, or 1,000 young men and women coming in to spend about 500,000 to $1 million within a space of 1 or 2 weeks in a local community. You know how it boost that local economy. So what I'm saying in essence is that 4.2% is not beyond us if we can put our acts together. But the only thing is that looking at the trajectory of where we're coming from, who is in charge, and how they've been operating the economy in the last 6 years, it becomes like a very big pipe dream.
Yeah, but when you also look at the constraints under which they've had to operate, for instance, we do know that the price of oil has been shaky. It's recovered somewhat now, and I think it is even expected to be more bullish in the coming months. However, COVID and its concerns have been there. The lockdowns, we saw it from other economies, and it was seen that we've been seeing a fragile recovery of some sorts. Don't you think that also has something to do with our projections?
We had our first recession before COVID, before the lockdown. And
on the back of the price of oil.
No, hold on. Did you go through information about the price of oil in the Obasanjo days? How much did Obasanjo's government sell oil on the average? All those times you saw 100, 1 something, were outliers. They were spikes. They were not the traditional trajectory of oil prices during those times. And these days, even when we sell oil at a higher price, it's becoming detrimental to our economy because of the way we've managed the economy. The more oil you sell, the more higher the price, the more subsidy somebody somewhere claims, even if though the subsidy is inflated. So there are a lot of things why we say that this can happen. For instance, if you look at the claim of subsidy, 1.82 trillion, these are clearly inflated claims. I've restated this fact so many times, and nobody from the NPC, from the Ministry of Finance, have come forward to challenge the facts as we stated. Look at this scenario. 2015, when the former administration was going, they were claiming subsidy on 35 million liters per day of PMS. Way back, fast forward, 2 recessions, so many factory closures, reduction in GDP, unemployment spiking. You are now claiming subsidy on what? 55 to 60 million liters per day. And even at that 35 million liters they were claiming under the previous administration, people were saying that they still had a margin for corruption. Now, how do you account for the spike between 35 million to about 55 to 60, 20 or 25 million liters added every day? These are all corrupt. You know, people simply sat down and padded distance. And I've told you the reasons. GDP nosedived, economy 2 recessions, more factory closures, more unemployment. I thought that PMS usage will go up when you have a more robust economy. So if you will even remove that 20, 25 million liters a day in the claim for subsidy, you reduce the claim for subsidy. So there is so much that can be done. Even the inflation, they is rated at 13. It may be more than that. If you spike up the price of PMS and increase the electricity tariffs, it will still go back to 18, 19, 20, or even more than 20, 25. And some of us are also saying that even the planned removal of fuel subsidy, which is going to pitch a very angry populace, people who are already down, they fear no fall, they're already angry, out and poor, with almost a cash-strapped government. So on both sides, there's frustration. Okay, you can even achieve that within a regime without necessarily increasing the price of crude oil, increasing the price of PMS. How do you achieve that? Simple. Remove the subsidy from consumption and redirect the subsidy to production. Allow Dangote refineries to come on board, because it is clear that the government cannot run any refinery despite all the billions of dollars they spent, or it doesn't turn around any refinery, rather it enriches the pocket of a few people on the corridors of power. Allow Dangote refinery to come on board. Simply look at what he needs to give us enough liters of petroleum to consume and give him the crude oil at maybe half the international market price, so that he can produce enough for domestic consumption. And if you do that, we are not losing a lot. Oil is a Western asset that very soon, 10, 15 years from now, nobody will even be talking to you about it, because the internal combustion engine is being phased out. So even if you do that subsidy at that end and lose a little, and it will not even be part of your OPEC production quota, which you have to send out on a daily basis, you can still achieve having people buy fuel at 160, 170, cut down subsidy drastically by over 50%, government wins, reduce subsidy, the people are happy, there will be no confrontation. But if they want to do that, that's their business. We have brought these ideas to the table, but if anybody wants to listen, good. If they don't want to listen, there will be fire next year.
Okay, we sincerely hope that we can put out the fire before it starts. But let's take a break at this point, and we'll come back shortly to continue our discussion. Please stay with us. We're still talking about the 2022 budget, and we still have with us Mr. Eze Onyekbere, who is the lead director at the Center for Social Justice and also an economic policy analyst. We also have with us Mr. Wonsu, Dr. Wonsu, who's joining us from Nsukka, from Enugu via Zoom. I quickly take this now to Lagos with my colleague Ayo, who has more questions for the gentleman.
Thank you very much, Markwe. Well, gentlemen, one of the concerns that I'm sure you both have looked at over and over again is the capital versus expenditure, gaps, as well, of course, as the deficits that we have looked at from time to time. And then another issue that is of concern to me, blocking leakages and all, and of course, being a little more productive. Mr. Onyekbere, you were talking the other time about the production part of that we should be a little more productive, that government should fund the production end of the budget of our life, of our economy a little more. So I'm just wondering how, for instance, that plays out for you in this budget, given that one of the instruments with which government enables the budget is the finance bill, finance law, finance act, which amended in this year, for instance, about 12 of our finance instruments in the country. But given that one of the objectives of the finance bill in itself is to support micro, small, and medium enterprises, how significantly do you think the budget that we're reviewing now, or rather previewing its effectiveness in the year 2022, how effectively do you think it addresses the concerns of micro, small, and medium enterprises? How significantly do you think it supports their activities and their production capacity?
Well, very well. I think that if you look at the budget, the one that has been passed by the National Assembly, although yet to be assented by the President, we still have a very huge deficit, one, and capital expenditure, the projection is still less than the recurrent, and of course we still have a very huge bill for debt service. So if you look at these issues combined, you realize that debts must be paid, salaries must also be paid, overheads must be drawn down. Is the capital expenditure that suffers or once the revenues are not sufficient and enough to be able to fund expenditure. And then one other provision of the Finance Bill 2022, which I understand has been approved by both chambers of the National Assembly, is an amendment of the Fiscal Responsibility Act to increase the conditions under which borrowing can be done, because borrowing before was strictly reserved for capital expenditure and human development. They are seeking to add critical reforms of national importance as a condition for borrowing, which is quite nebulous. So if you look at these things all in all, we do not have a guarantee from the budget that we are going to see increase in service like power supply. There is no guarantee from the budget that the numerous taxes and levies that are charged on medium and small scale enterprises will be streamlined. And of course, there is also no guarantee that insecurity will be reduced for all producers around the country. And of course, with the proposal for the increase in the price of PMS, which is going to affect everybody, I see a little more bleak 2022, not just for small and medium scale enterprises alone, but for the generality of the populace and the economy. So if government plays according to the cards it has laid on the table, things are going to get a little slightly worse than it is today. So that's an unfortunate scenario, but that is exactly what is going to play out if the budget is implemented as it is today and all the other policy specifications they made are also implemented.
Dr. Nwosu, what's your take? My concern, Dr. Nwosu, on this is that if we are not able to produce as much as we should, then it continues to put a big question mark on the capacity of the Naira to improve its buying power, both in the hands of Nigerians and as a currency on its own in the global market.
Yeah, that is true. But there are other concerns, just as Mr. Bere pointed out. You know, looking at diversification of the economy and the growth of micro, small, and medium enterprises, budget cannot address this as it is, because there are so many problems that affect their capacity utilization. And of course, we do know that there is high cost of doing business in Nigeria. You pointed out multiple taxation. There is also supply bottleneck. You know, if you are moving produce from one state to another, you are going to encounter so many people on the road who will stop lorries and begin to harass them and collect one form of levy or the other. Then there is also the rising cost of energy, which of course these medium enterprises will not be able to sustain. Some of them may even go out of business, just as we predicted in bleak 2022. And there is a high cost of borrowing. Sometimes they are not able to access the borrowing, due to the fact that they are small businesses. They cannot provide reasonable collateral to banks and all that. So productivity aspect depends on how medium enterprises are supported so that they can support domestic production, because if domestic production is not increased, there will continue to be pressure on exchange rate. So he also mentioned the issue of refinery, Dangote refinery, and of course, I don't know, Nigeria has given up the idea of petroleum refining. That will help to reduce the cost of energy, because anytime you import fuel, you are incurring huge foreign components of the cost of shipment wise, export duty, in custom duty, value added in the country where the fuel is manufactured or petroleum products were refined. You pay for cost of labor, and then you pay for custom duties, cost of demurrage, marketers markup, and so many things. So if you look at all these foreign components of energy cost, you will see that it is of course optimal to produce them at home than going out there. So you see, supporting small businesses is not just producing budget figures. So government needs to look into their problem. You know, the last time Nigeria conducted enterprise survey was in 2014. Since 2014, we don't know much about the performance of Nigerian enterprises. You know, that's a long period, over 7 years. That was the last time we saw enterprise survey in Nigeria. So these are things that we have to inform budget and policy. We cannot continue to make assumptions. So without adequate domestic production, we'll continue to have exchange rate challenges, and this will also even result in more imported inflation that will fuel up the higher price levels we are facing. And all these are likely to affect the productivity of small and medium enterprises. And again, we there continue to remain small. Over time, most of these small enterprises are supposed to metamorphose into higher or bigger enterprises or large enterprises. But instead, in the medium run, some of them will go out of business. This is not good.
You know, from what you have also said, you have also identified some reasons why that happens, in that, you know, some policies, some instruments of government that is not really helping these micro, small, and medium enterprises to be as productive as they ought to be. And that, in a way, sounds like you're saying, and both of you have referred to that one, but let me start with you, Dr. Nwosu, on this one. You gentlemen, you seem to be saying that as far as you're concerned, this budget may not perform as optimally as it is assuming to perform because of some of the policies, other policies that the budget has to work with, whether or not they have been factored in.
Yes, actually, beyond the budget figures, we also need to look at other factors. You know, when budget figures are released, they trigger what we call expectations. Different kinds of expectations, and these expectations may even make the budget itself ineffective, because if business firms do not see the budget as favorable, they are not likely to react in the required direction and so on. So government should look into those problems small and medium enterprises are facing and address them the much they can. Some of them can be addressed by fiscal policy, and then others monetary policy, and so on. So these are the things. Other things that can remove supply bottlenecks, and so on. These are issues, policies that should come with the budget. The figures have always been there. Not only recently, since the 1930s, governments have continued to rely on fiscal policy, to close demand gaps. But the government will not continue to do this. If you are looking for sustainability, the private sector should also grow. And again, remember, the deficit we saw has its own adverse effect, because that will also increase government borrowing. And we know huge borrowing by the public sector has this crowding out effect of funds that may be available.
All right, Dr. Nwosu, let me ask Mr. Onyekwere the same question, because you have also raised some of those issues, Mr. Onyekwere, concerning some other policy instruments that need to support the budget. Do you think they have been effectively factored in? There's a good enough handshake to ensure that the budget of 2022 performs as optimally and the private sector is strongly encouraged?
I don't want to, or I have not seen those policies that has successfully or sufficiently engaged the private sector to make sure that they become more productive next year, or even increase in service delivery on the part of government. Rather, I'm looking at the political economy of 2022. You know, it's the year preceding the elections. And in the year preceding the elections, governance to a great extent takes a backseat and politics triumphs governance. Everybody is thinking of who is going to be the next president. Senators, House of Reps members want to come back. Ministers are jostling to be seen so that they will be reappointed in the next administration. So I'm not sounding to put up a dark cloud, but the way things are going, so not so much is the pattern for 2022 is not so exciting. But if the administration is seriously concerned, the first thing they should do is to reduce insecurity. If we reduce insecurity, that will be a beginning. Because even small-scale farmers who cannot go to farms or to harvest what they've already planted will be able to start going about their legitimate aspirations. And then in talking about the private sector, there are those binding constraints that have reduced our productivity or that has not allowed us to produce at an optimum level. What have we so far done with access to electricity? Anything good coming out except increase in tariffs or year on year, year in, year out? And all the complaints that the private sector has raised, even relating to the ports that have been mentioned, even related to the roads, the cost of doing business in Nigeria, have we improved or deteriorated over the years? Looking at 2022 from where we are today, you can see that it's not to paint a bleak picture, but there will be critical challenges. But it also provides an opportunity for us to make the right decisions. In terms of being a year preceding the elections, for us to be able to examine the candidates that are coming out, what they have to say, the antecedents, the economic plan, so that we can elect a new government that may have some better policy options to put on the table for Nigerians. So it's not just all doom, but there's also an opportunity in 2022 to leave the past, which is a little bit dark, and move on to a brighter side by making sure we have a properly articulated policy position. Now, if you look at the new overarching policy that the government has just brought out, you ask yourself, how can you bring out such a policy a year before you vacate office? If a new government comes to power in 2022, definitely the way we know Nigeria, that policy will be jettisoned. Even in the days when there was a transition between the same party, you saw Nigerians leave needs to 7-point agenda, from 7-point agenda to transformation agenda, still within the same party. So even once another person comes in today, the way we know Nigerians, that policy proposal will be jettisoned. So it will be better for us to use next year to plan for what is coming in the subsequent 4 years, get very good policy positions, let the public sector and the private sector buy into it, so that come 2023, whoever is going to take over will simply begin to shoot and to implement same.
But with regards to fighting corruption, because, you know, oftentimes the budget is supposed to help, you know, implement the policies of government. That's essentially what it's supposed to help do. So with regards to fighting corruption, apart from the funds appropriated for the security agencies and the anti-corruption agencies, there's also the approval for the NFIU and the EFCC to be able to keep 10% of the proceeds of the fight against, of whatever it is they recover from, you know, in their fight against corruption. Is that a positive development in your opinion?
I think it's a little bit positive. But there is a challenge, because every day we hear from the radio, television, and newspapers huge sums of money that have been purportedly recovered by these agencies, particularly the EFCC. But as a student of the budget, go to the budget implementation reports. Most times you see hyphen. So what has been reported officially to have come to Treasury as part of the process of recovery is less than 20% of what is reported in the media. And the media is not that the journalists are talking. Reported quoted speeches of the leadership of these agencies. So, well, to encourage them, great, but there are real agencies that should be encouraged, real in the sense that they have duties that more or less relate to what? Making sure that revenue, like the Fiscal Responsibility Commission, under the Fiscal Responsibility Act, should be is charged with making sure that operating surplus of government-owned agencies are paid into treasury. And that's a huge amount of money that could possibly run into trillions of naira if that agency is strengthened, properly funded, and encouraged. These are the kind of agencies we think should get something from whatever they recover, help the government recover. So yes, EFC, CICP, CNFIU, good, but there are other agencies who have a statutory mandate that could also enrich the treasury. For instance, most of these GOEs in the past have been keeping a good chunk of their money. But of course, of late, under the 2021 Finance Act, they've been told, whatever you spend, make sure you don't spend more than 50%, return it to Treasury. And some of us are saying that it's not just returning that to Treasury. Keep all of them on the Treasury single account, all right? All their income and expenditure will come in there. So instead of them remitting money to Treasury, the Minister of Finance and Accountant General and the Fiscal Responsibility Commission will sit down and make a deduction. Deduct what is due to government. Government owns them. Whatever government feels they should get, once the money is TSA, you see all their income, you deduct. Not wait for them at the end of the quarter or month for a remittance. If anybody is unhappy with the deduction you've made, they will come for reconciliation.
Well, I do remember, I think I recall recently when the ICPC clocked 5, beg your pardon, did I say clocked 5? It's more than 5. You were celebrating something at 5. I think I'm mixing them up with Pebek. But they were holding a second national
international workshop or conference
on corruption, something to that effect. And they did say, I think at that particular, there were a few government agencies or government officials who did say that that's precisely what they're going to start doing. They're not going to be waiting for the government agencies to remit anymore. They're going to be asking.
Deducting.
Yes, that's exactly what they said.
Put them on TSA.
Yes.
But they've not been doing that in the past. So that these issues of under remittance, because if you read the Auditor General of the Federation report, all of these things are there. And you know what these agencies are doing? Like the reports of 2017, we took it up, and all those agencies that they say return money, we did a freedom of information and a mandamus application against them. Give us information. First of all, that you have to return this money to Treasury is a public duty. Now, we are giving you notice, perform this public duty, since we are not able to satisfy the Auditor General with explanations. And also give us evidence under the Freedom of Information Act that you have performed this public duty. University of Abuja, their vice chancellor, went and hired a senior advocate and is challenging the matter in court. And we keep asking, where is the budget for paying a senior advocate coming from?
Big question. Well, now that the government agencies said, I mean, government, especially from the Ministry of Finance, government officials say that's precisely what they're going to be doing now. We'll wait to see what difference it will make in the 2022 budget. We have to thank you both for coming on Sunrise Daily this morning. Mr. Ezeonekweru, thank you so much for coming this morning. He's a lead director at Center for Social Justice. He's an economic policy analyst and also a lawyer. We also had joining us via Zoom Dr. Imanwu, who is the head of Department of Economics, University of Nigeria, Nsukka, a visiting scholar at the IMF, Washington, D.C., a technical assistant, Office of Finance Minister between 2013 and 2014. Thank you so much for joining us this morning as well.
Thank you.